The first snow arrived for dawn, not the soft, expected snowfall that usually welcomed winter to Moonlight Falls. This one came weeks too early. It arrived without warning. Without thunder, without wind, only silence. When the first residents opened their curtains that morning, they found the entire town buried beneath a blanket of white. Roofs shimmered beneath fresh snow. Street lamps still glowed softly against the pale sky. Every pine tree bent beneath the unexpected weight, as though the forest itself had grown older overnight. For most people, it felt like a gift. Children rushed outside before breakfast. Laughter echoed through quiet streets. Snowballs flew. Fresh footprints stretched across untouched yards. Shop owners swept snow from their doorsteps while greeting neighbors with surprised smiles. Moonlight Falls had always loved winter. But winter had never arrived like this. Near the center of town, Thomas stood outside the old general store with a steaming cup of coffee warming his hands. He wasn't watching the children, he wasn't watching the streets. His eyes remained fixed on the distant outline of Blackwood Mountain. Snowflakes drifted onto the brim of his hat. He didn't seem to notice.
Too early.
His voice was barely louder than the falling snow. A young man carrying grocery bags waved as he walked past.
Morning, Thomas. Beautiful day, isn't it?
Beautiful, but wrong.
You always say that when the weather changes.
I've lived here long enough to know. The mountain doesn't send snow this early without a reason.
I think the mountain is just cold?
The young man laughed and continued toward home. Thomas didn't laugh. His eyes never left the mountain. He had watched those peaks for more years than most people in town had been alive. He trusted them more than weather reports. Something had changed. He could feel it. A sudden flutter broke the silence. Thomas slowly looked upward. A flock of ravens exploded from the forest, one after another. Then dozens more. Black wings filled the white morning sky. The birds circled only once before flying away from Blackwood Mountain. None of them turned back. Thomas frowned.
Even you are leaving.
The snow continued falling, soft, steady. Almost peaceful. Yet the forest had become strangely quiet. No squirrels darted across the branches. No deer wandered near the tree line. Even the wind seemed unwilling to enter the woods. The silence felt unnatural, as though every living creature had heard something humans could not. On the hill overlooking the town, warm light glowed through the tall windows of Blackwood House. Inside, a fire crackled quietly. The scent of cedar and old books filled the room. Lucien stood alone beside the window. A porcelain cup of untouched coffee rested on the table behind him. He watched the snowdrift across the gardens. Normally, he enjoyed mornings like this. Snow reminded him that the world could still become quiet. For a little while. Tode. The silence felt different. His gaze slowly lifted toward Blackwood Mountain. The distant peaks had almost disappeared behind the falling snow. For a brief moment, he remembered another winter. Another storm. Another silence. The memory vanished before he could grasp it.
Strange.
His reflection stared back from the cold glass, calm, collected. Yet something deep inside him refused to settle. He closed his eyes, listened. The fire crackled, the old clock ticked steadily. Snow brushed softly against the windows. Then far away, a sound. Not loud enough to recognize, not close enough to identify. Only a faint echo carried through the mountains. Lucien opened his eyes immediately. The sound was gone. He stepped onto the front balcony. Cold air greeted him instantly. Snow landed silently on his dark coat. The entire valley stretched before him. Beautiful. Peaceful. Almost untouched. Too peaceful. His senses reached beyond the town. Beyond the frozen river. Beyond the pine forest. Nothing. No unusual scent. No unfamiliar heartbeat. Only silence. Yet the uneasy feeling remained. Stronger now, as though something invisible had crossed into Moonlight Falls before the snow itself. Another movement caught his attention. More birds. Not ravens this time. Small mountain birds. They flew low across the valley in hurried groups. Every flock moved in the same direction, away from Blackwood Mountain. Lucien watched until the last bird disappeared beyond the rooftops.
Animals don't panic without a reason.
He spoke softly, mostly to himself. The words disappeared into the cold air. Behind him, the fireplace continued burning. The house remained warm, safe, peaceful. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the day had already begun differently, somewhere beneath the snow. Something was changing. A familiar knock echoed through the house. 3 gentle knocks, always the same rhythm. Lucien smiled before turning around. Only one person visited this early without sending a message first. He walked toward the front door. His hand rested on the brass handle. Before opening it, he glanced back toward the mountain one last time. Snow continued falling. Slowly, quietly, covering every trail, every footprint, every secret. For the first time in many years, Lucien found himself hoping his instincts were wrong. He opened the door. Warm air drifted into the hallway as Lucien opened the front door. Standing outside was Ava. A thick wool scarf was wrapped around her neck, and tiny snowflakes clung to her dark hair. She smiled before saying a word.
I figured you'd be awake.
I've been awake for hours.
I guessed as much.
She stepped inside, brushing the snow from her coat. The heavy wooden door closed behind her, shutting out the cold wind. For a moment, the world became quiet again. Only the fireplace crackled softly in the background.
I brought breakfast.
She lifted a paper bag with a proud smile. The smell of fresh cinnamon rolls immediately filled the room. Lucien looked at the bag, then at Ava.
You walked through all this snow for pastries?
They're still warm, so yes.
Lucien couldn't help smiling. Over the past few weeks, moments like this had quietly become part of his life. Simple, ordinary, the kind of mornings he had once believed he would never deserve. A few minutes later, the two of them sat beside the fireplace. Snow drifted lazily beyond the tall windows while steam rose from 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence felt comfortable, not awkward, just peaceful.
I still can't believe how much snow fell overnight.
Neither can I.
Thomas was outside telling everyone the mountain was warning us.
That sounds like Thomas.
You don't believe him?
Lucien stared into the fire for a moment before answering.
I believe he notices things other people ignore, but whether those things mean anything, I am not sure.
Ava nodded slowly. She had learned something about Moonlight Falls. People here often spoke in stories. Sometimes those stories turned out to be true. Sometimes they were simply stories. The difficult part was knowing the difference.
I was thinking about Emily.
Lucien looked toward her.
She spent years trying to leave us clues. We found photographs, we found journals, but it still feels like we're missing something.
We are.
Do you ever wonder if we're looking in the wrong place?
Lucien considered the question. He had wondered the same thing more than once. Victor had hidden the truth for decades. Someone incapable of doing that wouldn't leave answers in obvious places.
Secrets usually survive because everyone searches where they're expected to. A good secret waits somewhere no one thinks to look.
So, we keep looking.
We keep looking.
Ava smiled. She reached for another cinnamon roll. Lucien watched her for a second before quietly sliding the last one toward her side of the table.
Aren't you going to eat that?
I know you'll ask for it in another minute.
You know me too well?
I am beginning to.
She laughed, a real laugh, bright enough to compete with the firelight. Lucien found himself laughing too. The sound surprised even him. Months ago, Blackwood House had echoed with silence. Now, someone else's laughter filled its empty rooms.
I've never seen you build a snowman.
Because I've never built one.
Seriously?
Seriously.
That is actually tragic.
I've survived worse.
Not after today. You are building one.
Lucien raised an eyebrow.
Is that an order?
It is a promise?
He shook his head with a quiet smile. For the first time in what felt like years, The future seemed capable of containing ordinary things. Snowmen, hot chocolate, lazy mornings. Perhaps that was what happiness looked like. Not dramatic, just peaceful. The peaceful moment lasted exactly 12 more seconds. Lucien's phone vibrated sharply on the table. The screen lit up. Ethan. Lucien answered immediately.
Ethan?
The smile slowly disappeared from his face. He listened without speaking. Across the room, Ava watched his expression change. Concern replaced warmth. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes turned toward the snow-covered mountain road beyond the window. After several long seconds, he finally spoke.
We're leaving now.
He ended the call. Ava was already standing.
What happened?
A truck lost control on the mountain highway. The road's blocked. There are injuries.
Without another word, both of them reached for their coats. Outside, the snow was still falling, heavier than before. The tires crunched through fresh snow as Lucien's SUV climbed the winding mountain road. Visibility grew worse with every mile. Snowflakes swirled wildly through the headlights, turning the world beyond the windshield into shifting white shadows. No one spoke. Only the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers filled the silence.
How bad is it?
Ethan said a truck hit the guardrail. He didn't know how many people were inside.
The ambulance?
They're coming, but this road is nearly impossible to drive.
Ava looked out the side window. Snow had already covered the tire tracks from only a few minutes earlier. The storm wasn't slowing down. It was getting stronger. A few minutes later, flashing emergency lights appeared through the snow. Red, blue. Then disappeared again behind the blowing wind. Several vehicles were already parked along the roadside. A pickup truck blocked one lane. 2 local volunteers were trying to direct traffic around the accident. Lucien pulled over. Before the engine had fully stopped, he was already outside.
Lucien?
She hurried after him. The cold air stole her breath immediately. Snow blew across the highway in thick waves, about 50 yards ahead. A large delivery truck had slammed sideways into the guardrail. Its front end was badly crushed. One wheel hung over the edge of the mountain road. Steam drifted from beneath the twisted hood. Ethan was already there. His jacket was covered with snow. The moment he saw Lucien, relief crossed his face.
Glad you are here?
Status?
Only one driver? He is trapped? The steering column collapsed? We've called for hydraulic tools, but they won't get here for another 20 minutes?
Lucien looked toward the cab. The driver's breathing was shallow. His face was pale. One arm hung motionless beside the broken window. Every passing minute mattered.
We don't have 20 minutes.
I know.
Without hesitation, Lucien climbed onto the damaged truck. Metal groaned beneath his weight. Snow made every step slippery. He reached the shattered driver's side window and looked inside. The man was conscious, barely.
Help!
We're here, stay with me. You are going to be all right.
The driver's breathing quickened. Fear filled his eyes. Lucien spoke calmly, keeping his voice steady.
Look at me. Don't look at the truck. Just listen to my voice. Can you tell me your name?
Daniel?
Good, Daniel. Keep talking to me.
Lucien quickly examined the cabin. The steering wheel had pinned Daniel against the seat. The dashboard had collapsed around his legs. Opening the door was impossible. The frame had twisted shut.
Can you reach him?
I can, but getting him out won't be easy.
Ethan climbed onto the passenger side. The two exchanged a brief glance. No further discussion was needed. They had worked together enough times to understand each other's thoughts.
I'll stabilize the truck. You get him breathing.
All right.
Lucien carefully reached through the broken window. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong pull could make the injuries worse. Snow continued falling onto Daniel's face. Lucien gently brushed it away.
Stay awake. Tell me about your family.
My daughter, she is waiting.
His voice trembled. Lucien nodded.
Then we're getting you home. I promise.
Behind them, Ava helped one of the volunteers carry blankets from an emergency vehicle. She moved quickly between people, checking on those who had gathered at the scene. There weren't many. Only a few stranded drivers waiting for the road to reopen. Most stood quietly beneath umbrellas or inside their vehicles. Everyone watched the rescue unfold. A loud crack echoed through the storm. The damaged guardrail shifted. The truck leaned another few inches toward the cliff. Several people gasped.
Easy. Nobody move?
Lucien froze. The truck settled again. For a second, everything became still. Snow drifted silently around them. Then Lucien leaned farther into the cab. He wrapped both hands around the bent steering column. Muscles tightened beneath his coat. Metal groaned. Slowly, very slowly, the crushed frame began to move. Just enough. Only a few inches. But enough for Daniel to breathe more easily.
Save your strength.
Far below, the sound of approaching sirens echoed faintly through the valley. Help was finally on its way. Lucien allowed himself one slow breath. The worst might soon be over. Then, a warm scent drifted into the freezing air. Almost impossible to notice. Almost Lucien's expression changed. His eyes lowered toward Daniel's chest. Fresh blood, slowly spreading beneath the torn winter jacket. The scent grew stronger with every heartbeat. Lucien's fingers tightened instinctively. For the briefest moment, the world around him seemed to become very, very quiet. End of section 3. Time seemed to slow. Snow continued falling. The wind still howled across the mountain road. People shouted behind him. Metal creaked beneath the truck. Yet none of those sounds reached Lucien as clearly as the steady rhythm inside the cab. A heartbeat. Strong. Rapid. Fighting to survive. Thump, thump, thump. Each beat pushed another pulse of warm blood through Daniel's injured body. The scent drifted upward. Fresh, metallic. Warm, it mixed with the freezing air until it became impossible to ignore. Lucien lowered his eyes. A jagged piece of twisted steel had torn through Daniel's side. The thick winter jacket had slowed the bleeding, but it hadn't stopped it. Another drop landed on the floor of the truck, then another, then another. Lucien inhaled once, only once. Immediately, he regretted it. His muscles became rigid. His heartbeat quickened without warning. Deep inside, an ancient hunger quietly opened its eyes.
Ha!
His fingers tightened around the bent steering column. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for the metal beneath his hands to groan. Daniel looked at him with frightened eyes.
Am I going to die?
Lucien forced himself to meet the man's gaze instead of looking at the wound. He answered calmly. At least, his voice sounded calm.
Numbers stay with me. Help is almost here.
Daniel nodded weakly. His breathing became faster. The smell of blood filled the cramped cab a little more. Outside, Ethan continued holding the truck steady. He noticed Lucien had stopped speaking.
Lucien?
No answer.
How is he doing?
Still conscious.
The reply came half a second too late. Ethan frowned slightly. Something felt off. Lucien kept his eyes fixed on Daniel's face, not the wound. Never the wound. He had learned that lesson long ago. Look at the eyes. Listen to the voice. Ignore everything else. It usually worked. Usually. Another gust of wind slammed into the truck. The vehicle shifted again. Daniel cried out in pain. A fresh stream of blood soaked through the torn fabric. The scent hit Lucien all at once. His pupils contracted. Every sound around him faded. Instead, he heard blood moving through veins, the rapid rhythm of Daniel's heart, the warmth beneath cold skin, the impossible invitation carried inside every heartbeat. His breathing became slightly uneven. He immediately noticed. So did Ethan.
Lucien?
This time, Ethan's voice was firmer. Lucien blinked. The world rushed back for an instant. Snow wind. Sirens. People. He answered without turning around.
I am fine.
He wasn't. His jaw tightened. The veins beneath his hands became visible. Every instinct told him the same thing. Closer. Just one step closer. The thought appeared before he could stop it. Lucien closed his eyes for half a second. Number. When he opened them again, he deliberately looked toward the snowy road instead of Daniel. He counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Breathe. Again. 1, 2, 3. The hunger retreated. Only a little, but it retreated. Ava reached the side of the truck carrying a medical bag one of the paramedics had sent ahead. She climbed carefully through the snow.
They're almost here. They asked for these.
Lucien reached down without looking. Their hands touched briefly. Just for an instant, Ava immediately felt something strange. His hand was ice cold, colder than the falling snow. She looked up at him. His face remained composed, too composed.
Lucien?
He didn't answer. Instead, he handed the medical bag to Ethan.
Pressure bandages. Use everything you've got.
Got it?
As Ethan leaned into the passenger side, Lucien quietly climbed down from the truck. His boots landed softly in the snow. No one paid attention. Everyone believed he was simply making room for the arriving paramedics. Only Ava continued watching him. Lucien walked several steps away, slowly, carefully, every movement controlled. His breathing remained steady, but his fists were clenched so tightly that the leather of his gloves began to stretch. Ava followed. Not too closely, just enough to hear him if he spoke.
Don't.
His voice was barely audible. Almost lost beneath the wind, Ava stopped immediately. She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Something was wrong. Something had changed the moment Lucien smelled the driver's blood. Behind them, the first ambulance finally reached the accident scene. Paramedics rushed toward the truck carrying hydraulic rescue equipment. Relief spread through the crowd. Everyone focused on the rescue. No one noticed Lucien standing alone beside the snow-covered guardrail. No one, except Ava. She watched him lower his head. For the briefest moment, his eyes caught the flashing red emergency lights. The crimson reflections burned across his silver irises. Just for an instant, his eyes glowed deep red. Then the color disappeared. Ava's heart skipped a beat. End of section 4. The flashing emergency lights painted the snow in shifting shades of red and blue. Paramedics hurried toward the truck carrying hydraulic rescue tools. Metal clanged against metal. Orders were shouted through the storm. Everyone's attention centered on saving Daniel. No one noticed Lucien standing several yards away. No one, except Ava. She remained where he had asked her to stop. She didn't move closer. She didn't call his name again. She simply watched. Lucien stood perfectly still, his back turned toward the accident. His shoulders rose and fell almost imperceptibly. To anyone else, he looked calm. Ava knew better. She remembered the first night they had met. The fear in his eyes. The restraint he carried every waking moment. This wasn't anger. This wasn't panic. This was something far older. Something he fought every single day. Behind them, the rescue continued. The hydraulic spreader forced the crushed dashboard apart inch by inch. Daniel cried out in pain. Fresh blood soaked through another layer of bandages. The scent drifted across the cold air once again. Lucien closed his eyes. His jaw tightened. His breathing faltered for only a second. That second felt endless. Inside his mind, two voices struggled against each other. One reminded him who he had become. The other whispered what he had once been. Warm blood. Easy. One step. No one would stop him. Lucien opened his eyes immediately. Number the word never left his lips. He said it only to himself. His fingers slowly unclenched, then tightened again. Ethan glanced toward him while helping the paramedics. Their eyes met for only an instant. That was enough. Ethan understood. Something was terribly wrong.
Take over here?
He handed his position to one of the firefighters and climbed down from the truck. Keeping his movements natural, he walked toward Lucien. Not too quickly. Not too slowly. Anyone watching would think they were simply discussing the rescue.
How bad?
Lucien didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the snow beneath his boots. Finally,
Worse than before.
Can you stay?
Lucien was silent. Several long seconds passed. Then he gave the smallest shake of his head.
Then don't.
No hesitation, no judgment. Only trust. They had known each other for too many years to waste words.
I'll finish here. You leave?
Lucien finally looked at him. There was guilt in his eyes.
I left you alone once before.
And today you are leaving to protect someone. That is different.
For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Snow continued collecting on their shoulders. The ambulance crew finally lifted Daniel free from the crushed cab. People nearby applauded quietly. They believed the worst was over. Only Ethan knew the real danger had never been the accident. Lucien looked toward the ambulance. Daniel was alive, breathing, surrounded by doctors. He had done everything he could. If he stayed any longer, he might undo all of it. Lucien took one slow step backward. Then another. Every step away from the ambulance felt like lifting a mountain. The scent of blood weakened. His breathing steadied slightly. One more step, another. Ava watched him retreat. Only now did she finally understand. He wasn't walking away from danger. He was walking away from temptation. He was choosing everyone else's safety over his own pride. Lucien reached his SUV. His hand rested on the driver's door. He didn't open it. Not yet. He leaned forward, gripping the roof until the metal creaked softly beneath his hand. His entire body trembled once. Only once. Then he forced himself still.
Lucien?
She spoke quietly. Not close enough to startle him. Not far enough that he would feel alone. Lucien didn't turn around.
You shouldn't come any closer.
I know?
I mean it.
I know?
Silence settled between them. Snowflakes landed softly on Ava's coat. She stayed exactly where she was, neither advancing nor retreating. She understood that trust sometimes meant respecting distance. At the accident scene, Daniel was loaded into the ambulance. The rear doors closed. Sirens echoed through the valley once again. The vehicle slowly disappeared into the storm. Ethan watched it leave before looking back toward Lucien. Relief crossed his face. The injured driver would live. Now, there was only one person left to save.
Go? I'll handle everything here?
Lucien gave a silent nod. He opened the driver's door. Instead of starting the engine immediately, he looked into the rearview mirror. For the briefest moment, deep crimson flashed across his eyes once more. He closed them, took one slow breath, then another. When he opened them again, the silver had returned barely. He started the engine. The SUV disappeared into the falling snow. Ava watched until the taillights faded into white. Without saying a word, she got into her own car and followed him. End of section 5. The drive back into town felt longer than it ever had before. Snow continued falling without mercy. The windshield wipers struggled to keep pace. Lucien gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breathing had become steady again, but only on the surface. The scent of blood still lingered in his memory, far stronger than it should have. He lowered the driver's side window. Freezing air rushed into the vehicle. It helped, only a little. He knew this feeling. He had experienced it before. The hunger wasn't fading. It was waiting patiently, quietly, looking for one mistake. Behind him, another pair of headlights remained at a careful distance. Ava, she never tried to overtake him, never flashed her lights. She simply stayed behind, close enough to know where he was, far enough to respect the distance he had asked for. Lucien noticed her in the mirror. He closed his eyes for the briefest moment.
Please don't.
He wasn't speaking to Ava. He was speaking to the hope that she would eventually turn around. She didn't. Instead of driving toward Blackwood House, Lucien turned onto an older road leading toward the edge of town. The buildings grew farther apart. Streetlights became fewer. Eventually, even the houses disappeared. Only abandoned warehouses and forgotten workshops remained beneath the falling snow. Years ago, this had been Moonlight Falls Industrial District. Now, most of it had been reclaimed by silence. Lucien finally stopped beside an old repair garage. Its faded sign had long since fallen from the building. Broken windows stared into the storm like empty eyes. No lights, no people, no sounds, exactly what he needed. He stepped out of the SUV without looking back. Snow immediately covered his shoulders. His footsteps echoed softly across the frozen pavement. The heavy garage door stood half open. Lucien pulled it the rest of the way. Rust groaned loudly through the empty building. Inside, dust-covered forgotten tools. Old workbenches lined the walls. A rusted pickup truck rested beneath a torn canvas sheet. Everything smelled of cold metal and age. Lucien walked to the center of the garage. For several seconds, he simply stood there, listening. Nothing. No heartbeat except his own. Outside, another engine stopped. Ava had arrived. She climbed from her car. Snow immediately coated her hair. She looked toward the dark garage. Lucien was already inside. The large steel door remained open.
Lucien?
He didn't answer. Instead, he walked toward a thick steel chain hanging from the wall. Onse used to secure heavy equipment. He wrapped it around the inside handles of the garage door. Onse, twice, 3 times. Then he fastened the old industrial padlock. The loud click echoed through the empty building. Ava's expression changed immediately. She hurried several steps closer. Not enough to reach the door, just close enough to see through the narrow gap beneath it.
Lucien?
Don't come in.
His voice sounded calm. Too calm. That frightened her more than panic would have.
We can figure this out.
Number.
A long silence followed. Snow continued drifting across the empty parking lot. Finally, Lucien spoke again, more quietly this time.
I can still smell it.
Ava closed her eyes. She understood. The blood. He was still fighting it.
You left? You protected him?
I don't know if I can keep doing that.
The words were almost swallowed by the wind. Inside the garage, Lucien leaned both hands against the cold steel door. He kept his forehead against the metal. Every instinct told him to run. Every lesson he had learned told him to stay. Outside, Ava looked around the deserted lot. There was nowhere else she needed to be. Nowhere more important. She quietly brushed the snow from an old wooden crate sitting beside the garage wall. Then she sat down. Not beside the door. Not against it. Several yards away, far enough to remain safe, close enough that he wouldn't be alone. Lucien heard the faint sound.
What are you doing?
Waiting?
You shouldn't.
I know.
I could lose control.
I know.
Lucien closed his eyes again. Her answer never changed. Not denial, not blind confidence. She knew exactly what he was afraid of, and she stayed anyway. The silence stretched between them. Only the wind spoke. Snow continued piling higher around the abandoned garage. The old building seemed completely forgotten by the rest of the world. Inside, Lucien slowly slid down the steel door until he was sitting on the cold concrete floor. Outside, Ava remained on the wooden crate, quietly watching snowflakes disappear into the darkness. Neither of them could see the other. Only a thin steel door separated them. Yet somehow, neither of them had ever felt closer. Then a violent crash exploded from inside the garage. Metal slammed against concrete. The entire building shook. Ava stood instantly. Her heart stopped. Inside, Lucien's battle had truly begun. End of section 6. The crash echoed through the abandoned garage. Metal slammed against concrete. Then another. Each impact shook loose decades of dust from the ceiling. Outside, Ava instinctively took one step forward. She stopped herself immediately. Lucien had asked her not to come closer. She intended to keep that promise, no matter how difficult it became. Inside the garage, Lucien staggered backward. An old steel cabinet toppled onto the floor. Its doors burst open, scattering rusted tools across the concrete. He barely noticed. His entire body had become rigid. Every breath felt like dragging broken glass into his lungs. The scent of blood refused to leave. It no longer came from outside. Now it lived inside his memory. Every heartbeat replayed it. Every breath brought it back.
Number.
He squeezed his eyes shut. The hunger answered with silence, patient, certain, waiting for him to become tired, waiting for his will to weaken. Lucien slammed both hands against a concrete pillar. The building trembled. Tiny cracks spread through the old plaster. Pieces of dust drifted slowly to the floor. He lowered his head, forced himself to breathe. On 2, 3, again 1, 2, 3, again. It wasn't enough. Outside, Ava heard every impact. Every moment of silence frightened her even more. She folded her arms tightly against the cold. Snow had already begun collecting on her shoulders. Still, she didn't move. Several long minutes passed. Finally, Lucien spoke through the steel door. His voice sounded exhausted.
You should go home.
Number?
You've already done enough.
I don't think I have.
This isn't your fight.
It became my fight the day I chose to stay.
Silence answered her. Only the wind moved between them. Inside, Lucien rested his back against the cold wall. He stared at the snow-covered light filtering through a broken window high above. He remembered every person he had ever lost, every mistake, every promise he had failed to keep. He could survive loneliness. He could survive centuries of regret. But he couldn't survive hurting Ava. Not even once.
If I lose control...
His voice almost disappeared before reaching the door.
You won't?
You don't know that.
Number? I don't, but I know you.
Lucien laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because he wished he possessed the same certainty.
I've lived with this longer than you've been alive.
And you've won every single day.
Lucien lowered his eyes. She was wrong. He hadn't won. He had merely survived. There was a difference. The storm outside continued to grow stronger. Snow drifted against the garage door, slowly covering its base. Ava rubbed warmth back into her hands. She hadn't realized how cold they had become. Still, she remained seated. Another 10 minutes passed. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The silence no longer felt empty. It became something else. Company. Inside the garage, Lucien noticed something. Every time he heard Ava's voice, the hunger retreated. Only a little. Only for a moment. But it did. The memory of blood became less vivid. The rhythm of her calm breathing outside the door slowly replaced the heartbeat that had haunted him since the accident. He listened. Not to satisfy hunger, to stay human. Outside, Ava leaned her head against the cold brick wall. She smiled faintly.
You know, when I was little, I used to be afraid of snowstorms.
Lucien remained silent. She continued anyway.
My grandmother always said storms sounded louder when you faced them alone. So she'd sit with me until morning. She never really said much. She was just there.
Lucien closed his eyes. He understood what Ava was doing. She wasn't trying to distract him. She wasn't pretending everything was fine. She was simply refusing to let him face the night alone.
I think she was right. The storm never became smaller. It just became easier to hear someone breathing beside you.
For the first time since arriving at the garage, Lucien's breathing finally slowed. Just a little. Then a low growl escaped his throat before he could stop it. His entire body froze. The sound didn't belong to the man he wanted to be. It belonged to something much older. Something buried deep inside him. Outside, Ava heard it. She closed her eyes. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden crate. Fear washed through her. Real fear, not imagined, not theoretical. For one brief moment, she understood exactly how dangerous this could become. She took one slow breath, then sat back down. She didn't leave. Inside the garage, Lucien heard the wooden crate creak as she settled into place again. His eyes slowly filled with disbelief. She had heard everything. She was afraid. And she was still there. End of section 7. The snowstorm showed no sign of ending. Hour after hour, thick snow continued to blanket the abandoned garage. The road leading into the industrial district had nearly disappeared beneath white drifts. No cars passed. No voices echoed through the empty buildings. The world had become strangely small. One garage, one steel door, 2 people separated by only a few feet. Inside, Lucien remained seated against the concrete wall. His breathing had finally become steady, not because the hunger had disappeared, because he had learned to fight it one heartbeat at a time. Every minute was a victory. Every minute demanded another battle. Outside, Ava pulled her coat tighter around herself. The cold had slowly worked its way through every layer of clothing. Her boots were covered in snow. The wooden crate beneath her had become damp. Still, she stayed. The distant sound of an engine finally broke the silence. Headlights slowly appeared through the snowfall. A familiar pickup truck rolled into the empty lot. The driver's door opened. Ethan stepped out carrying a large insulated medical cooler. Snow immediately covered his shoulders. He looked first at Ava, then at the chained garage door. He understood everything without asking.
How long?
Almost 2 hours?
He hasn't come out?
Number?
Ethan nodded quietly. He walked to the garage door but stopped several feet away. He knew better than to stand directly in front of it.
Lucien?
A few seconds passed. Then,
I am here.
How are you holding up?
Still me.
Ethan smiled faintly. That answer was enough, still me. Not fine, not safe, but still himself.
Good. I brought something.
He opened the insulated cooler. Inside were several sealed blood bags, dark red, kept cold, carefully labeled.
Animal blood from the veterinary clinic. They keep emergency supplies.
Will it help?
It won't solve everything, but it might quiet the hunger.
Ethan carefully placed 2 blood bags on the ground. Using the handle of a snow shovel, he slowly pushed them across the concrete floor until they reached the narrow gap beneath the garage door. He stopped.
They're under the door. Take them when you are ready.
No answer came. Several long seconds passed. Neither Ethan nor Ava moved. Finally, a hand appeared beneath the narrow opening. Pale, steady, the blood bags disappeared into the darkness. Silence followed. Ava found herself holding her breath. She wasn't afraid of what Lucien might do. She was afraid of what he might think afterward. Inside the garage, Lucien stared at the 2 sealed bags resting on the concrete. He didn't reach for them immediately. He simply looked. A century ago, he would have torn them open without hesitation. Today, even this felt like surrender.
I am sorry.
No one outside heard the words. They were meant only for himself. Slowly, he picked up one of the bags, closed his eyes, then drank. The warmth spread through his body almost immediately. The burning inside his chest eased. His heartbeat slowed. The terrible scent that had haunted him since the accident finally began to fade. Not completely, but enough. Enough to think clearly again. Enough to remember who he wanted to be. Outside, Ethan listened carefully. No crashing, no growling, no violent impacts, only silence. He finally released the breath he had been holding.
That is a good sign.
Can you tell?
I can.
Another 20 minutes passed. The storm continued outside, but inside the garage, everything remained quiet. For the first time that night, the silence no longer felt frightening. It felt hopeful. Lucien slowly walked back toward the garage door. He stopped a few feet away. The steel chain still hung tightly across it. He rested one hand against the cold metal.
Ava,
I am here?
you never left.
I said I wouldn't.
Lucien lowered his head. His eyes closed. He had spent decades believing that everyone eventually walked away. Sometimes because they were afraid. Sometimes because he told them to. Sometimes because both were true. Tonight, someone had stayed. Not because she wasn't frightened. Because she believed he was worth waiting for. Lucien leaned gently against the steel door. For the first time since the accident, the hunger was no longer the strongest feeling inside him. Gratitude was. Outside, Ava smiled quietly, even though he couldn't see her. Neither of them noticed that, high on the roof of the abandoned garage, a lone raven had landed in the falling snow. It remained perfectly still, watching. End of section 8. The raven remained on the roof, silent. Motionless. Snow slowly gathered across its dark feathers. It never looked away from the garage below. Inside, Lucien stood with one hand resting against the steel door. His breathing was calm. For the first time that night, the hunger no longer ruled every thought. It was still there, it always would be. But it had become quiet, a voice instead of a scream. He closed his eyes. The scent of fresh blood had faded from his memory. Now he smelled only old concrete. Rust, cold steel, snow drifting beneath the door. The world had become ordinary again. He hadn't experienced that feeling in years. Lucien slowly lowered himself onto the concrete floor. His muscles ached. Not from fighting anyone else, from fighting himself. He leaned back against the wall and let out a long breath. For several minutes, he simply listened. The storm outside, the old building settling, and somewhere beyond the door, Ava's quiet breathing. It reminded him that he wasn't alone. Outside, Ethan glanced toward the dark sky. The snowfall had finally begun to weaken. Only a few scattered flakes drifted through the parking lot. He checked his watch.
I should head back. A few roads are still closed. A lot of people are going to need help tonight.
You think you'll be all right?
I think he already made the hardest choice.
Ava looked toward the garage.
He left the accident. He locked himself inside. He accepted help. Years ago, he wouldn't have done any of those things.
What would he have done?
Ethan smiled sadly.
He would have disappeared. For weeks, maybe months. He always believed he had to carry everything alone.
Ava lowered her eyes. She understood now why Lucien had seemed so surprised that she stayed. It wasn't because no one cared. It was because he had never allowed anyone to. Ethan picked up the empty cooler. Before leaving, he looked once more toward the garage.
Lucien,
I am here.
I am heading back. If anything changes, you know where to find me.
Thank you.
The reply was quiet, but Ethan smiled. Lucien almost never thanked anyone. That alone told him the worst had passed.
Get some rest.
The pickup truck slowly disappeared into the snowy night. Soon only Ava's car remained in the empty parking lot. Another half-hour passed. The clouds finally began to break apart. Moonlight slipped through the fading storm. Soft silver light reflected across untouched snow. The abandoned garage no longer looked frightening, only old, forgotten, peaceful. Inside, Lucien slowly stood. He flexed his fingers, no trembling. He listened carefully, no hunger pulling at his thoughts, no violent impulse waiting beneath the surface, only exhaustion, deep, honest exhaustion. He walked toward the garage door. The heavy steel chain hung before him. His hand rested on the cold padlock. He didn't unlock it immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes one last time. He asked himself a single question. Are you in control? Several long seconds passed. Then he answered. Yes, not perfectly, not forever, but for tonight, yes. The old padlock clicked. Its sound echoed through the empty building. Outside, Ava looked up immediately. She stood without realizing she had done so. The chain slowly slid across the steel door, link by link. Each sound seemed louder than the last. Then, the garage door opened only a few inches. Cold night air drifted inside. Moonlight spilled across the concrete floor. Lucien remained standing in the shadows. He didn't step outside, not yet. He wanted to be absolutely certain. He took one slow breath, then another. The cold air carried only snow. No blood, no fear, no hunger. Finally, he stepped into the moonlight. His face was pale. His clothes were covered with dust. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were silver, perfectly silver. For the first time that entire night, Lucien allowed himself to believe he had won. Then he looked across the snowy parking lot. Ava was still there, standing exactly where he had left her, waiting. She smiled. Lucien stood completely still. A feeling he hadn't experienced in decades quietly filled his heart. Relief. End of section 9. Neither of them spoke. For several long moments, they simply stood beneath the moonlight. The storm had finally passed. Fresh snow covered every rooftop, every tree, every forgotten road in Moonlight Falls. The entire town seemed to be holding its breath. Lucien remained beside the half-open garage door. He kept several yards between himself and Ava, not because he wanted the distance, because he still respected it, because he still wasn't ready to forgive himself for needing it.
I am sorry
For what?
for making you wait.
Ava smiled softly.
I wasn't waiting. I was keeping you company.
Lucien looked down. A quiet laugh escaped him. The sound carried something unfamiliar. Relief. He finally stepped farther into the moonlight, slowly, deliberately. Each step tested his own control. Nothing happened. The cold air smelled only of pine trees and fresh snow. His heartbeat remained calm. His eyes never changed. Only then did Ava begin walking toward him. Just one step, then another. She stopped several feet away, close enough to see him clearly, far enough that either of them could step back if necessary. Lucien searched her face. He expected hesitation. He expected caution. He expected to see the fear she had hidden so well. Instead, he saw tired eyes, cold hands, snowflakes caught in her hair, and quiet concern. Nothing more.
You were afraid.
Yes?
She answered without pretending otherwise.
I was?
You still stayed.
Yes?
Why?
The question lingered in the cold air. It wasn't a question he had asked only tonight. It was a question that had followed him for more than a century. Why would anyone stay? Ava thought for a moment before answering.
Because fear isn't the same as trust.
Lucien frowned slightly. She continued.
I was afraid of what might happen. I never stopped trusting who you are.
The words settled quietly between them. Lucien had heard people promise trust before. They always meant, trust me until something goes wrong. Ava meant something different. Trust you because I know you'll keep fighting. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. He lowered his head. His voice became almost a whisper.
I wanted you to leave.
I know.
I thought if you saw this, you'd never look at me the same way again.
I don't.
Lucien slowly looked up.
I look at you differently. A better way?
He blinked. She smiled gently.
I saw someone who could have walked away. Someone who could have hidden. Someone who could have blamed his nature. You didn't. You chose people. You chose control. You chose kindness.
Lucien stood completely still. No one had ever described his struggle that way. Most people saw only the monster he resisted. Ava saw the man doing the resisting. A quiet breeze drifted through the empty lot. The clouds had almost completely disappeared. The moon hung high above Blackwood Mountain. Its silver light reflected across the untouched snow. Everything felt impossibly peaceful after the longest night either of them could remember. Lucien slowly removed his gloves. His hands were no longer shaking. He looked at them for a moment, then quietly laughed.
I almost forgot what normal feels like.
Maybe you don't have to remember it alone anymore.
The sentence was simple, yet it reached somewhere no words had touched in decades. Lucien had spent most of his life believing strength meant solitude. Tonight, Simone had quietly proven the opposite. Ava reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out the thermos she had packed that morning. It was still there, still warm, at least a little. She unscrewed the lid. Steam rose into the cold night.
I think the hot chocolate survived.
Lucien looked at the thermos, then at her. A genuine smile finally appeared. Small, tired, completely real.
I didn't expect tonight to end like this.
Neither did I.
She poured the last of the hot chocolate into the lid and handed it toward him. This time, Lucien accepted it without hesitation. His fingers brushed hers for only an instant. Neither of them pulled away too quickly. The warmth of the cup contrasted sharply with the freezing night around them. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. The accident, the hunger, the fear, the storm. All of it faded beneath the quiet comfort of simply standing together. Far across town, an ambulance pulled into Moonlight Falls Medical Center. The injured driver was rushed inside. As nurses unloaded the last belongings recovered from the truck, one weathered wooden archive box was carried in separately. Its cracked leather strap finally snapped. Several old folders slid onto the floor. A young orderly knelt to gather them. One yellowed envelope had already fallen open. Across its front, written in faded black ink, were 2 words. Victor Blackwood. End of section 10. Moonlight Falls Medical Center remained busy long after midnight. Doctors and nurses hurried through brightly lit hallways. Stretchers rolled across polished floors. Phones rang. Monitors beeped steadily. Outside, the storm had finally ended. Inside, another story had just begun. The injured driver was rushed into surgery. His condition was stable. The emergency team quickly sorted through the belongings recovered from the wreck. A damaged suitcase, a heavy winter coat, several sealed shipping documents, and one old wooden archive box. The box looked strangely out of place. Its dark oak surface was scarred with age. Brass corners had turned green with oxidation. One leather strap had snapped during transport. Yellowed folders spilled across a stainless steel cart. A young orderly knelt to gather them. As he reached for the final envelope, a photograph slipped onto the floor. He picked it up. The picture showed an old stone building surrounded by snow. Nothing unusual. He tucked it back inside without another glance. Another nurse lifted the weathered envelope that had fallen open. Across the front, Summerlee had written a name by hand decades earlier. Victor Blackwood. She frowned slightly.
Looks important.
She placed everything back into the box. Hospital staff had no reason to open private documents. The entire archive was moved into temporary storage until someone could claim it. The box quietly disappeared into a locked evidence cabinet. No one realized its arrival would change everything. Across town, the moon shone brightly above Blackwood House. The snow-covered estate looked peaceful once again. Warm light spilled from the library windows. A fire crackled inside. Lucien quietly set another log onto the flames. The silence felt comforting. Not empty. Comforting. Ava sat nearby, still wrapped in a blanket Thomas had insisted she use. A steaming mug rested between her hands. Thomas disappeared briefly into the kitchen before returning with another pot of tea.
I've lived here a very long time. I've learned something.
Lucien looked toward him.
The worst nights usually end with people sitting around a fire. Not because the fire solves anything, because it reminds everyone they survived.
Ava smiled. Thomas quietly poured tea into 3 cups. No one rushed to speak. The silence no longer needed filling. After several minutes, Lucien finally broke it.
I owe both of you an apology.
Number you don't.
I brought danger here.
You brought yourself home. There is a difference.
Lucien looked down into his cup. Thomas continued.
I watched your father fight the same battle. I watched your grandfather fight it. Neither one believed they deserved help. They were wrong.
Lucien slowly raised his eyes. Thomas rarely spoke about the family. When he did, every word mattered.
Strength isn't pretending the darkness doesn't exist. It is choosing not to let it decide who you become.
The room became quiet once more. Ava glanced toward Lucien. He wasn't staring into the fire anymore. He was listening. Really listening. A soft knock interrupted the moment. 3 slow knocks. Everyone looked toward the front door. At this hour, no one should have been visiting. Thomas opened it. Ethan stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. His expression was serious, much more serious than before.
I thought you should know?
Lucien immediately stood.
What happened?
The driver made it through surgery?
Ava smiled with relief. Then she noticed Ethan hadn't relaxed. He was still holding a folded piece of paper.
There was something else?
He unfolded the note.
The hospital called. They found an old archive box among the driver's belongings.
Lucien exchanged a quick glance with Thomas.
One of the nurses noticed a name written on an envelope?
The room grew completely still.
Victor Blackwood?
No one spoke. The fire cracked softly inside the fireplace. Outside, snow slipped quietly from the roof. Thomas slowly set down his teacup. His hands, usually so steady, remained motionless for several seconds.
Are you certain?
They read it to me twice.
Lucien's expression hardened. Victor had vanished decades ago. His photographs, Emily's recordings, the abandoned chapel, everything had pointed toward him. Now, without warning, Victor's archives had arrived in Moonlight Falls inside a stranger's truck. Not hidden, not buried, delivered. Lucien looked toward the window. Moonlight reflected across the untouched snow outside. Nothing about this felt like coincidence. Simone had wanted those records to reach the town. Simone had been moving them before the accident, and whoever that person was might still be looking for them. End of section 11. No one spoke for several seconds. The fire continued to burn quietly in the library. Outside, the world remained covered beneath fresh snow. Inside, everything had changed. Victor Blackwood's name had returned. Not in an old photograph, not in Emily's recordings, but in a box that had somehow survived decades. Ethan unfolded the paper once more.
The hospital locked the archive box in temporary storage. They won't release it without proof of ownership.
Good.
Everyone looked toward him.
If those records survive this long, they deserve to remain untouched until we understand why they were being moved.
Lucien slowly nodded. Something still didn't make sense.
The driver wasn't from Moonlight Falls.
Number. He was transporting historical materials for a regional preservation project. The paperwork listed several old estates, but only one family name caught the nurse's attention. Blackwood?
Lucien frowned. A preservation project. That meant someone had been cataloging forgotten collections. Perhaps no one involved even realized what they had found. Or perhaps someone who knew exactly what was inside. Thomas quietly stood. He walked toward an old bookshelf hidden behind the fireplace. From the highest shelf, he removed a faded leather journal. Its cover had cracked with age. He carried it back to the table.
I hoped I would never need this again.
He opened the journal carefully. Its pages were filled with elegant handwriting, maps, family names, dates stretching back more than a century. Thomas slowly turned several pages before stopping. He rested one finger beside a single sentence.
Victor wrote this before he disappeared.
Lucien stepped closer. Ava remained beside him. Together, they read the faded words.
Truth survives longer than memory.
Only one sentence. Nothing more. The following pages had all been torn away, cleanly, deliberately.
Someone removed them?
Many years ago.
Lucien gently touched the edge where the missing pages had once been. The cuts were precise. Not damaged. Not accidental. Simone had chosen exactly what to leave behind. Truth survives longer than memory. The words echoed in the quiet room. Emily had spent years leaving recordings. Victor had hidden documents. Neither had tried to explain everything directly. Instead, both had left pieces, waiting for someone willing to assemble them. Ethan folded his arms.
If those missing pages are in the archive box, they could answer questions we've been asking for years.
Thomas slowly closed the journal.
Or create even more.
No one argued. Experience had taught them that every answer seemed to reveal another mystery. Lucien walked toward the library window. The clouds had completely cleared. Moonlight rested across Blackwood Mountain. The forest looked peaceful again, almost inviting. But he knew better. Somewhere beyond those trees, Victor's story had ended. Or perhaps it had only been interrupted. Behind him, Ava quietly approached. She stopped beside the window. Neither of them spoke. Their reflections appeared side by side in the glass. For the first time, Lucien didn't feel like someone standing alone against the darkness. He felt like someone facing it together.
What happens tomorrow?
Lucien watched the moon for a long moment. Then he answered.
Tomorrow, we bring the archive home.
The fire crackled softly behind them. Far away, the hospital lights continued glowing through the winter night. Inside a locked storage cabinet, the weathered wooden archive box waited silently. No one noticed that one yellowed folder had slipped slightly open, just enough to reveal the corner of another photograph. In the faded image, a much younger Victor Blackwood stood beside Emily. Behind them, carved into the stone wall of an abandoned quarry, was the same crescent moon symbol Ava had seen before, only now, beneath the moon. There were 3 words. Not a name. Not a name. A promise. The gate remains open. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered mountains,